Hi friends, welcome back to today's video. Today I'm going to do a little bit of a sit down because I have been wanting to share this with you guys. A while back I shared that our middle daughter, Callie, had what they call breath holding spells. And it took me a very long while to share that video. The reason I started was I had a lot of friends that their kiddos actually had breath holding spells as well. And then when I shared that video, the response was wild with how many people had kiddos that had breath holding spells but had never heard of them, didn't know anything about them, and was just very thankful for my tips and tricks. So the only reason I really made that video, I just thought we were going to keep that part of our life private to our family, but I didn't want anyone to feel like I did. And those tips and tricks made a world of a difference between when we had a really traumatic experience to me finally sharing. That video I will leave down in the description below, especially if you want to hear more details. I've had a child go through open heart surgery. I have had other things happen in my life, and to this day, that was the scariest moment of my entire life. So I don't really want to relive that, but I do want people who have kiddos that may have breath holding spells to feel supported and to feel like they have tools in their tool belt to handle the scary situations. So I went over onto Instagram to do a little Q&A, and you guys sent me a bunch of awesome questions to be able to give you an update on how Callie is doing. So Callie is going to be turning 5 next month, and so I figured to wrap up her 4-year-old year, we would celebrate. The reason that we're going to celebrate is one of the questions, do they outgrow it? And the reason we're celebrating is typically, but of course there are different cases, but typically they are done with their breath holding spells when they are 4. I am very thankful to say we are done with being 4, and Callie has officially outgrown her breath holding spells. So I'm going to first preface that being the first question, which is awesome, that yes, Callie does not have breath holding spells anymore. I know I asked the Q&A and you guys first were saying, I didn't know she was still struggling with those. She's not. She is not. I'll go out of order with my questions. That's okay. I'll give you the quick answers for those who just really want the quick detailed answers and you're busy and you've got other things to do. I will give you the cliff notes. When was her last breath holding spell? She was, I want to say a little bit over, but maybe right on 3.5. So it has been a 1.5 years since she has had a breath holding spell. And I didn't really want to do this video not knowing if maybe she would have another one and kind of see how she did as she turned 4. I want to say when they turn 4 is usually when they're done. And for Callie, in her case, when she turned 4, for some reason they develop and her breath holding spells are gone. Okay, so go back to the beginning of what in the world, Alex, are breath holding spells? That is a common question because I had no idea. Breath holding spells are more of a reflex than a behavioral defiant attitude. And I will get into triggers and things like that, but think of it almost as you hit your knee, you have this reflex. This breath holding spell is not particularly intentional. Now, can they end up having tantrums and get breath holding spells? Yes, it's not necessarily behavioral, it is a reflex. So if you have friends or family or you're seeing these kiddos, it might feel like they're trying to make a statement. Yes, in the sense that they're having these triggers and they're having a hard time, but they aren't trying to hold their breath and to pass out. Okay, so let's get into some of these questions. All in all, Callie passed out. She was very overtired, very exhausted. We had a pajama issue of which pajamas is pretty much was the trigger at that particular moment. So it was more on the behavioral side, and I'll get into other triggers in a little bit. But she ended up starting to cry, and I could see it happening. So for her, I saw triggers happening. This was just the worst one. So she, her eyes rolled back. She completely passed out. She ended up having seizure-like activity. So for her, and doing these, the pediatrician and the doctor and the ER doctor, these are seizure-like activities. So it looks like a full seizure, but it's not necessarily the seizure activity in the brain. So she ended up having that, and she passed out and was not breathing for a very long time. Moving on. Okay, so it was really bad. And why I want to preface this is that her story is not typical, as our life is not usually typical. But breath holding spells, the kid is going to usually pop out of it in about 30, I want to say it was 30 seconds. It could be 45. I haven't looked at Google on breath holding spells in quite some time, and I don't remember what the pediatrician said, but I feel like it was about 30 seconds. Don't quote me on it. Do your research. But I want to say they're supposed to pop back from it for 30 seconds, and that feels like a long time. So preface, I was a nurse. You kind of get used to being able to know how long things are. You're having to do assessments. I was a neonatal intensive care unit, so ICU. You are actually checking pulses and having to do resuscitations and things like that. So you are very aware of, like, okay, how long has it been? And anyways, what I'm trying to say is 30 seconds feels like a very long time. And when I was looking at it and marking it and assessing her, she was not breathing for a very long time, and she should have triggered herself out of it before then. Okay, so what age did they start? At the time, I didn't know what they were and didn't realize, but looking back, for Callie, she started hers it was 6 or 7 months. And I know because she was sitting up with pillows around her in front of the mirror, and she had like toppled over, and I picked her up, and the way she was looking, it was almost like she was glazed over, and then she kind of blinked and then was fine. And I just thought it was like a little odd, like, oh, she was just like maybe a little stunned or whatnot. But looking back, that was oh, sorry, I thought my camera was falling. So the reason I know that was a breath holding spell was because that was the behavior that she started having when she was having these breath holding spells. Next question, do they outgrow it? Answer that. So typically by age 4. And then, is it involuntary? Answer that. Yes, it's like a reflex. Next question, does Callie know she has it? So she is now outgrown it. So happy with that. But does she know she has it? She knows the stories, and she will say, especially with her last one, she knows her big story. She knows she had them, and then her most recent one, because she was 3.5, she knows because the girls talk about it, how, so I'll just jump into that story. So we were parking the RV, Philip and I were getting stuff out of the truck, the girls were in the RV, and I came in, and Callie was passed out on the ground. She did come to, and she was not pale and gray looking like the horrific traumatic experience, but we know she definitely had passed out for that one, and that came with the girls playing. So triggers, are they from pain or mad is the question, and it just depends. I would say for Callie anyways, scared typically, or startled from a fall was the main one, especially when she was younger. So 7 months was that first one. Another example of a scary one for me was she was crawling at a friend's house off of one of the little trampolines that you hold onto the bar and you can jump. She was big enough to crawl and move up and over, but she just kind of lost her hand balance and kind of like fell off of the trampoline that's like this big. And no hurt, no bump, bruise, anything like that, but it startled her, and she would hold her breath. And that one, I remember, she went pale, she passed out, but she came back too. So that was more on the scared, that her trigger was being scared or falling. Another trigger is being overwhelmed, exhausted, that kind of falls under the more behavioral side that some of you guys were asking the questions. For Callie anyways, it wasn't, I'm mad, I'm gonna hold my breath, I'm gonna show you. It wasn't like that. It was, I'm crying, and then I'm getting worked up, and I'm getting so upset, and then my eyes start rolling back because I have held my breath, and now I'm going to pass out. So that was the way it would happen for her. So handled it in public was the question, but this is how I handled it anytime. These are my tips and tricks. I want to say there might have been one more trick that I can't remember. If you again want to go check out the video, I will link it down below. But this main trick is one I just want everyone to know, that I can scream it from the rooftops and you can share it with anybody and everybody, is when they're having their breath holding spell or they look like they're about to, is to ask them a question. Now, I want to thank my triggers, by the way, to my other girlfriend who, her son also had breath holding spells. I learned these tricks from her. She shared them with me instantly. Other than the one time that I was not around Callie and it was just Callie and Kinsley together, I kept Callie from passing out ever again. And she was having these horrifically bad breath holding spells until I integrated these tricks and tips. So that number one is the most important, is to ask them a question while they're getting worked up. And even if they don't give you the answer, their brain is already triggered to, I'm supposed to answer this question. And when their brain does that switch, Callie would take in that breath. Now, I got some comments or some messages back of blow in their face. I got a couple of splash water in their face. Now, I can say I never tried the splash water in the face, but I tried the blow in their face technique. Callie had very significant breath holding spells. Now, if maybe your child has a little bit lighter, maybe it would work, but it did not work for Callie. It did not kick her out of that breath holding spell. So I love that that's an encouragement for some people, and it might work for you. That would be great. So maybe keep that as a tool in your tool belt, but it's the asking of the question and making their brain have to think that way is what got Callie out of having these passing out breath holding spells. Now, another trick in that, while you're doing it, ideally, is you are going to them to tend to them. This is not the time for discipline or to correct the behavior that maybe Callie did need to put on the specific pajamas that were laying out or whatnot, but that is not the time to deal with that or change it or enforce it. We're trying to switch the trajectory from having a breath holding spell to being alert and conscious the whole time. So while you're tending to them, asking the question, I would scoop Callie up and get her horizontal, whether we could get to the floor and I can lay her flat and ask her the question, or I can pick her up and lay her horizontal. So that's just so I can get more blood flow to her brain. So if she's upright, you know, think gravity. If she's laying down, and maybe if I'm holding her and even have her head down just a little bit, just to keep that blood flow to her. Now I know kiddos, cardiac conditions, TET spells, if you can bend your knees up to their chest, that's going to help your blood flow all the way up here, all the different things. Those are just like little minor tricks to help during this breath holding spell to make sure that she's getting all the blood that she needs to her brain so she's not going to pass out. Now, a trick that we did end up doing because Callie's breath holding spells were so significant is we did follow the recommendation of our pediatrician and Dr. Google, was the iron supplements. Now, the idea behind the iron supplements is to make sure that we've got a good hardy hemoglobin. Our red blood cells are hardy and strong enough that if we are going to hold our breath, that we still have enough to keep us from passing out. So those are my tips and tricks. Again, please encourage anybody and everybody that you know that possibly might have a kiddo like this, is teach them the trick of asking the kiddo a question before they get to the point where they are not communicating with you. It seriously nipped all of Callie passing out with her breath holding spells. Those went away. It was the biggest game changer, and I just hope everybody can use that tool to not have to have such scary situations with your kiddo. Okay, so next question was, is it when she's crying? If that was her trigger, yes. So she would cry until she got worked up. So sometimes. How to help when you're not around. So I kind of touched on this. So that was her very last breath holding spell, was in the RV. But she, like when we were walking in the door, she was already waking up. So that is typical for breath holding spells, is that they are going to come back. It's just terrifying to feel like you just sit there and wait while they are coming back and responding. It's just very scary. So I just want to take a note that people who aren't in the situation and don't know your kiddo, you might get some feedback feeling like you should have taken your kid to the ER, and maybe give you feedback that they feel is helpful, and they might feel like they know best in the situation. But I'm sure anybody who has a kiddo with breath holding spells, you already have your pediatrician, and maybe if you have been to the ER with a really scary situation, that doctor on board, where you come up with a game plan for your family, and usually their response is actually going to be, they're okay. They're going to be okay. That they will pop out of it, and you just have a game plan with your pediatrician. Okay, so the next question is, did being a nurse help calm fears and anxieties? I would say yes and no. I would say no, because when it's your own kid, you cry over the emotions that it is your baby. Now, maybe some people are going to compartmentalize and go into nurse mode, and in nurse mode, you are, this is the task, this might be the patient, but I see them as, I need to get this done. You're not seeing it as, this is my loved one, and your overwhelming love for the patient. So it is very different. So the anxieties and stresses are still there as a mom. I would say yes, that being a nurse was helpful in the sense that I have been trained in CPR and emergency situations over and over and over again. In our particular situation, my nurse mode did end up kicking in. Go watch that video if you want to hear the details. Okay, I will say this part because I know not everybody has time to go watch that other video. She was not breathing for multiple minutes. It was not 30 seconds. It was not 10 seconds that felt like 2 minutes. So for a kiddo, you're going to feel right in the brachial. I did not feel a pulse, and nurse mode went into doing compressions on my own kiddo. And it was the scariest moment of my entire life. Like the absolute deepest, scariest, like in the moment, I thought I was losing my kid. And it was traumatizing. And we went through multiple cycles of compressions before Callie came to. So it was not like a blow in the face, or you would think that you would wake up from such a significant event, but she did not. And I would say my loved ones and our doctors were so affirming, because you want to kick yourself of what could I have done different. And they affirmed me so much. One of my dearest friends is also a NICU nurse, and she said, what if she'd needed it, Alex? In that situation, even though we say breath holding spells, they don't need it. My doctors were saying, you know, you're right, she probably didn't need it, and she probably would have come out of it, but that was a very long, significant period of time. And the doctors really reassured me that what's the worst is that she gets a little bruising. Now she didn't have any sore bruising. We are very thankful for that. Now, that being said, I want to reaffirm that in breath holding spells, they are supposed to respond. They are supposed to come back to you without any type of intervention. But with the question of, did being a nurse calm any anxieties, I would say yes, in the sense that I had the training to respond to a scary situation with such strong training in CPR. 2 more questions. First question, fear of leaving her with babysitters. So I educated everyone. I mean, every single person I came in contact with, whether it was Sunday school teachers to family. I don't know if we had any friends babysit. I'm trying to think if I did. But I educated everybody about breath holding spells, and the biggest kicker was to ask the questions if she was getting herself worked up and crying, and then also about laying them flat. We never had an issue, thank goodness. But yes, I was fearful, but I also was just in the situations I wasn't going to not live her life and not let her go to Sunday school, but I just taught everybody that I knew that this was something that they needed to be aware of. And my phone was on speed dial probably at Sunday school. Last question, I actually did already answer this, but when was her last episode? She was 3.5 in the RV in the living room and never had one since. And I am very thankful that that time and season of our life is over. It was very scary. So I'm going to end this video here. I am glad that this update is us saying that we have graduated from breath holding spells. I just want to encourage you, if you are in the season that your kid has breath holding spells, you are going to get through it, and it is scary, and I know it is scary, but you're awesome, and it's going to make you a stronger parent. I will see you guys in our next video. If you guys have any questions, leave them down in the comments below, because we have comments, and I will see you guys in my next video. Go let your love multiply. Gotta go tend to the baby. Bye guys.